Could I start again then? Thank you. The emergency meeting of the Security Council underscores the gravity of events in recent days in Syria and their severe consequences for civilians, and takes place in a moment of increased international tensions, drawing in national, regional, international actors into dangerous situations of potential or actual confrontation. It is an important Security Council session, Mr. President. There is an urgent need for this Council to find a way to address the situation with unity and purpose. How did we reach this point? March saw devastating violence in half of eastern Ghouta that resulted in at least 1,700 people killed and injured in opposition-controlled areas, and dozens killed and injured in government-controlled areas, and ultimately the evacuation of 130,000 people, including fighters, family members, and other civilians. But in Douma, there was a fragile ceasefire that held for most of March, and the UN good offices did play an important role in that regard. But from the 31st of March, the UN was not able anymore to be involved in talks, since at that time the Syrian government did not consent to our presence, though we have made efforts to propose concrete ways to address issues that we understood were coming up in continuing contacts, including suggesting to activate the Astana detainee working group, but this suggestion at that time was not taken up. From 2nd of April, the evacuation of some 4,000 fighters, family members, and other civilians from Douma to northern Syria did take place. But then, on the 6th of April, there was a major escalation in violence. There were reports of sustained airstrikes and shelling on Douma, killing of civilians, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and attacks damaging health facilities. There were also reports of shelling on Damascus city, reportedly killing and injuring civilians again. Jaish Islam requested our involvement in emergency talks in extremis, but there was no positive response to that when they conveyed to the other side same message. On the 7th of April, at around 8 p.m. local time, reports started emerging of an alleged chemical weapons attack in Douma. Pictures immediately circulated on social media showing what appeared to be lifeless men, women, and children. NGOs on the spot, on the ground, claimed to have received hundreds of cases of civilians with symptoms consistent with exposure to chemical agents. The same NGOs claimed that at least 49 people were killed and hundreds injured. I wish to recall what the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, had noted, and I would like to quote him, that the UN, quote, is not in a position to verify these reports, but he has also made very clearly that he cannot ignore them. And, I quote, that he is particularly alarmed by allegations that chemical weapons have been used against civilians, population in Douma once again. And further emphasized, and I quote, that any use of chemical weapons, if confirmed, is abhorrent and requires a thorough investigation. I note that a number of states have strongly alluded or expressed suspicion that the Syrian government was responsible for the alleged chemical attack. I note also that other states, as well as the government of Syria itself, have strongly questioned the credibility of these allegations, depicting the attacks as a fabrication and a provocation. My comment, one reason more than for a thorough, independent investigation. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has said that it has made a preliminary analysis of the reports of the alleged use of chemical weapons and is in the process of gathering further information from all available sources. My colleague who is sitting with you, Thomas MARKRAM, Deputy of the High Representative for the Disarmament Affairs, will further address this matter. But I urge the Security Council, in accordance with its own mandate, to maintain international peace and security and uphold international law, to, for God's sake, ensure a mechanism is found to investigate this allegation and attribute responsibilities. Returning to the narrative of the events, at around midnight of the 7th of April, hours after the alleged chemical weapons attack, Jaish Islam informed the UN that they had reached an agreement with the Russian Federation and the Syrian government. The Russian Federation Ministry of Defense stated that the agreement encompasses a ceasefire and Jaish Islam fighters laying down their arms or evacuating Douma. The Russian Federation also reported that up to 8,000 Jaish Islam fighters and 40,000 of their own family members were to evacuate. As a brief view now, we understand that additional evacuations from Douma are already underway. We have also received reports that some detainees, the ones we had heard before, have begun to be released from Douma today. We do note reports that the agreement provides for civilians who decide to stay to remain under guarantees of the Russian Federation, with the resumption of services in coordination with a committee of civilians locally. I urge the Syrian government and the Russian Federation to ensure protection of those civilians so that as many civilians as possible can stay in their homes if they choose to, or leave to a place of their own choosing, or return as per international law. And I urge that there will be, or there should be, an immediate refocus for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2401. What we have seen is basically a escalation before a de-escalation. Mr. President, clearly the dangers of further escalation arise from situations beyond Ghouta as well. We have received reports of missiles targeting the Syrian government Tias or T4 air base early this morning. No state has claimed responsibility for this reported strike. The United States and France have explicitly denied any involvement. The Syrian government, the Russian Federation, and Iran have suggested that Israel could have carried out the attack, with Iranian state media reporting over a dozen military personnel being killed and injured, including 4 Iranian military advisors. The government of Israel has not commented. The United Nations is unable to independently verify or attribute responsibility for this attack. But we urge all parties to show the utmost restraint and avoid any further escalation or confrontation. We are also concerned at dynamics in other areas of Syria. Syrians in Dara, northern rural Homs, eastern Halamun, Hama, and Idlib have all expressed to us their own fears that they may soon face similar escalation to what we have seen in eastern Ghouta. We urge therefore this Council and the Astana guarantors and those states involved in the Amman efforts to work towards reinstating the escalation in these areas and elsewhere in Syria. The indications are the opposite at the moment. Meanwhile, further to its operation in Afrin, the Turkish government has indicated the potential for further operations in other areas of northern Syria if PYD and YPG forces are not removed from those areas. Military operations in such areas have the potential of international tensions, and we therefore urge all parties concerned to de-escalate, show restraint, and find through dialogue means to implement 2401 and fully respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Let me also highlight that we have seen recently, and this is particularly tragic, when you look at the efforts of all of us, all of you, in the last year, seen recently ISIL launch new operations in Syria, inside Syria, in south of Damascus, rural Damascus, in remote areas near the Iraqi border. Mr. President, let me conclude with some bottom lines, if I may. First, civilians are paying a heavy price for military escalation. We are not seeing the escalation, we are seeing the contrary. Today, our first priority must be protect civilians from the war, from the conflict, from chemical weapons, from hunger. We call on all sides to ensure respect for international humanitarian and human rights law, including humanitarian access across Syria to all people in need. And we urge once more concrete respect of Resolution 2401 throughout Syria, your resolution. Second, continued allegations of use of chemical agents are of extremely grave concern. These allegations must be independently and urgently investigated. Any use of chemical weapons is absolutely prohibited and constitutes a very serious violation of international law, Chemical Weapons Convention, Security Council Resolution 2118. Preventing impunity and any further use of chemical weapons and upholding international law must be an utmost priority of all members of this Council. Third, I have to say it very slowly because it's the first time during my presentation over 4 years of my own briefings that I've reached a point in which I am expressing a concern about international security, not only regional or national or Syrian security. Mr. President, dear members of the Security Council, recent developments carry more than ever before the dangers that the Secretary General has warned about recently at the Munich Security Conference. He spoke of Middle East, of quote-unquote different fault lines that are completely crossing each other and interconnected, of conflicting interests of both global and regional powers, and forms of escalation that can have absolutely devastating consequences that is difficult for us to even imagine. The Council cannot allow a situation of uncontrollable escalation to develop in Syria on any front. Instead, it must find unity and address the concrete threats to international peace and security in Syria today. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry to have been short, but focusing on one specific concern, the threat to international security related to what we are seeing now in Syria, and on the danger of repetition of the alleged chemical weapons attacks. Next time, I will be able to give you a briefing about humanitarian issues, about other aspects, about the political process, which I know we all are interested and focused on. But today, is the day of security, international security and peace. Thank you.
Briefing, which was very informative and enlightening. I now give the floor to Mr. Thomas MARKRAM. Mr. Thomas MARKRAM.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today. The High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Mrs. Zumi Nakamitsu, is away on official travel. Mr. President, it has been less than a week since I last briefed the Council on the issue of chemical weapons in the Syrian Arab Republic. In the intervening period, new and deeply disturbing allegations of the use of chemical weapons have come to light. Over this past weekend, reports have come in regarding the alleged use of chemical weapons in Douma in the Syrian Arab Republic. According to reports that came in yesterday, it is alleged that at least 49 people were killed and hundreds more were injured in a chemical weapons attack. Others, more than 500 individual cases, reportedly presented with symptoms consistent with such an attack. The Office for Disarmament Affairs has been in touch with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons on this matter. The OPCW, which implements the Chemical Weapons Convention to which Syria is a state party, is gathering information about this incident from all available sources through its fact-finding mission. Following the completion of its investigation, the FFM will report its findings on this alleged attack to the states parties to the convention. Mr. President, there is sadly little to be said today that has not already been said. The use of chemical weapons is unjustifiable. Those responsible must be held to account. That these views have been stated before on many occasions does not lessen the seriousness with which such allegations are regarded by the Secretary General. Nor does it lessen the truth behind them, which is what we are seeing in Syria cannot go unchallenged by anyone who values the decades of effort towards bringing about the disarmament and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. As the body charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, the Council must unite in the face of this continuing threat. The Council must fulfill its responsibilities. To do otherwise, or simply to do nothing, is to accept, tacitly or otherwise, that such a challenge is insurmountable. The use of chemical weapons cannot become the status quo, nor can we continue to fail the victims of such weapons. Just over 1 year ago, in responding to the attack on Khan Sheikhoun, the Secretary General called for those responsible to be held accountable, stating that there can be no impunity for such horrific acts. Just over 1 week ago, speaking on behalf of the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, I noted that unity in the Security Council on a dedicated mechanism for accountability provided the best foundation for success in this regard. I reiterate that belief here, as well as the readiness of the Secretary General and of the Office for Disarmament Affairs to assist. I thank you for your attention.
Doy las gracias.
I thank Mr. MARKRAM for his very informative briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I begin by giving the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if you believe it is a great pleasure for me to speak about the issue that we will talk about now, to make a statement on the side, then you are mistaken. But unfortunately, the situation is such that I will have to state a great deal today, and it will be incumbent upon you to listen to what I have to say. We are grateful to Mr. de Mistura for his briefing, as well as to Mr. MARKRAM. The Russian Federation called for this meeting to be held on the agenda item, threats to international peace and security. insofar as we are deeply alarmed at the fact that in a number of capitals, above all in Washington, and those blindly following it, London and Paris, there was a deliberate policy undertaken to stoke international tensions. The leadership of the United States, of the United Kingdom, and of France, without any justifications and without considering the consequences, have engaged in a confrontational policy against Russia and Syria, and they are prompting others to follow suit. A broad arsenal of methods is being leveraged: slander, insults, hawkish rhetoric, blackmail, sanctions, and threats to use force against the sovereign state. Russia is being unpardonably threatened. The tone with which this is being done has gone beyond the threshold of what is acceptable, even during the Cold War. Such boorishness against my country is something which your predecessors did not take the liberty to undertake. What is next? We recall a rhetorical question which the Russian president put forward in 2015 from the United Nations General Assembly to our Western partners, above all the United States, concerning their reckless geopolitical experiments in the Middle East. Do you understand now what you have done? And the response at that time hung in the air. But there is a response. No, you do not understand, just as you fail to understand what you are doing now. The lack of a clear strategy on any issue is appalling not just to us. It confounds not only us. This is confounding to the majority of those seated here, but they have decided not to openly put this forward to you, following you everywhere you go, regardless of everything you touch. Chaos is left behind in the brackish waters of which you try to take out something. But only mutant fish are being taken out. I will put another rhetorical question forward. Do you understand the dangerous threshold towards which you are bringing the world? One of the areas where there's hostility that is most stark, that is on Syria. The terrorists and extremists supported by external sponsors are enduring a defeat there. Let us recall that we are talking about those terrorists and extremists who you supplied, financed, and deployed in the country to oust a legitimate government. And now it is clear why this is causing hysteria among those who invested political and material capital in these dark forces. Recently, thanks to the efforts undertaken by Russia, in line with implementation of Security Council resolutions, a large-scale operation has been undertaken to lift the siege of eastern Ghouta. Its residents, for a number of years, were forced to endure the mockery and torture of fighters. More than 150,000 civilians were evacuated from that Damascus suburb, purely voluntarily, with the requisite security conditions being provided. Tens of thousands of them have already been able to return to the liberated areas, and many met with their relatives. There has been no change in democratic composition, which is being shouted about by supporters of the Syrian opposition, has occurred. These are lies. With the leaders of armed groups, there were difficult negotiations that took place. As a result, many of them left the areas they had occupied with full respect for guarantees for their safety. Incidentally, during these transportation operations, several attempts were undertaken to stage terrorist attacks when the militants attempted to reach the buses with the Shahid belts. Others prefer to settle their status with the Syrian authorities. Thanks to presidential amnesty, they now will be able to return to civilian life, and subsequently it is possible they may enter the Syrian security forces. We're talking about implementation of a UN principle in demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration. However, this positive dynamic is not to the liking of some foreign sponsors through Western countries were willing to take up any straw just to maintain a hotbed of terrorist resistance at a striking distance from the Syrian capital. This for the fighters to continue to terrorize ordinary civilians, to seize their food, and to request from the to beg of the international community that humanitarian assistance be delivered. Incidentally, they were not prepared to share medicine with ordinary civilians, as was shown in the inspection of the strongholds left behind by the fighters. As was the case in the past in eastern Aleppo, improvised hospital facilities in basements were full of medicine, which, as a result of sanctions, Western sanctions, were not provided to Damascus and other government-controlled areas. Also, large storage heights were found, as were the bodies, the corpses of people who had been subjected to torture. We are stunned at the scale of the tunnels that were being used by jihadists, and some of them, small trucks were able to freely move about. These surprising underground facilities brought together the positions of groups who were viewed by some as moderate, and they were linked to the strongholds of Jabhat al-Nusra. On 6 April, the new head of Jaish al-Islam, following instructions of sponsors, derailed the evacuation of the fourth party of fighters from Douma and resumed the rocket and mortar firing against residential areas in Damascus. The firing targeted Meze 86, Ish al-Vurur, Abu Rumana, and Umayyad. According to official information, 8 died, 37 civilians were wounded. Unfortunately, we failed to see statements from Western capitals condemning the shelling of a historical district of Damascus. The following day, 7 April, fighters accused the Syrian authorities of dropping barrel bombs with toxic substances. At the same time, the versions were being mixed up. It was either called sarin, at times chlorine, or at times a mix of toxic gases. Based on a well-known scheme, these rumors were immediately taken up by those financed by Western capitals. I'm referring to NGOs and the white helmets who are mendaciously acting under the cloak of health professionals. And these reports were also taken up and transferred to media outlets. It behooves us once again to state that many of these dubious opposition structures have a clear list of the email addresses of representatives of Security Council members, which shows that some of our colleagues with a reckless approach towards their status are leaking sensitive information to their proteges. Incidentally, all should recall the way that accidentally the white helmets put on the internet an video which showed preparation for staging a so-called victim of an alleged attack perpetrated by the Syrian army. In 2011, the chemical serial began, and this continues to be shown to us with the calculation for each new episode to be more resonant than the one prior to it. In Washington, London, and Paris, immediately conclusions were drawn, pinning blame on the Syrian authorities, or, as they call it, the regime. Has nobody put the question to themselves, why does Damascus need this? There were insults against the Syrian government. However, the Syrian leadership. However, the main burden of responsibility was pinned on Russia and Iran, and I think that this is hardly surprising to anybody at this point. Now this has been done based on current trends immediately without any investigation being conducted. On 8 April, the Syrian troops sweeping through Al-Shimuna near Douma found a homemade manufacturing area of Jaish al-Islam to manufacture chemical substances artisanally. Chlorine agents of German manufacture and special equipment were also discovered. In Istanbul, the opposition journalist Assad, who is based, put on his Twitter page a video allegedly from the area of the incident. This has probably from the white helmets. An unknown individual is next to a handmade bomb with a chemical which allegedly struck the bedroom of a building in Duma. All of this is accompanied by comments about another attack by the regime against civilians. The staged nature of this action is something of which there's no doubt. The trajectory of the alleged trajectory of the bombs is unnatural. This fell through a roof and naturally, calmly fell into a bed without damaging that bed. A wooden bed without damaging the wooden bed clearly was placed there prior to preparation for the staging. And there's an interesting coincidence. The chemical provocation in Duma on Saturday, 7 April, occurred immediately after the U.S. delegation at the Security Council received instructions to convene for today, Monday, 9 April, to convene expert-level consultations on their draft resolution on the mechanism to investigate incidents with chemical weapons. The initial text today has far-reaching changes and revisions. Under these obscure circumstances, of course, we need to get to the bottom of what is taking place. However, we need to do so in an honest, objection, impartial way without disregarding the principle of presumption of innocence and by no means prejudging the outcome of the investigation. Despite the provocations, Russian specialists continued their efforts to resolve the situation in eastern Ghouta. In afternoon, 8 April, Sunday, following a new agreement that was reached, the evacuation of Jaish al-Islam fighters resumed. Following the liberation of Duma from fighters, Russian specialists were sent there, specialists on radiological, chemical, and biological protection to collect evidence and information. They took soil samples, which showed the lack of nerve agent and chlorine-containing substances. Locals were interviewed about the cessation of resistance to the fighters. Not a single local resident confirmed the chemical attack having taken place. A local hospital, there were no reports about symptoms from a toxic substance such as chlorine. Other medical facilities are not located in Duma. The bodies of the dead as a result of contamination were not found. Medical personnel and residents have no information about their potential burial areas. Thereby, the use of sarin and chlorine is not confirmed. Incidentally, the representatives of the Syrian Red Crescent refuted the statement allegedly made on their behalf on the delivery of assistance to victims of toxic gas. I call upon those who will speak against me slandering the regime to proceed from the premise that there was no chemical weapons attack. Sweden drew up a draft resolution to investigate the incident. In principle, in order to conduct an investigation, the OPCW needs no resolution. However, we are willing to consider this resolution. Today, we propose that what you envisage in your project, in your draft, be done. Let the OPCW, which through the the Director General of the Technical Secretariat, Mr. Zumduk, stated a willingness to get to the bottom of what took place, let it immediately, tomorrow, fly to Damascus There, the Syrian authorities and Russian troops will provide conditions to travel to the area of the alleged incident for them to familiarize themselves with the situation. Incidentally, this is what President Trump and other Western leaders called upon us to undertake. As for the possibility of a chemical attack being a possibility, this was repeatedly warned about by the Syrians at the Russian Center for the Reconciliation of Opposing Sides. It was stated that in order to take film of a chemical attack, and I put this in quotes, the necessary equipment has already been brought in. We, too, made the relevant statements of the Security Council. You've heard these warnings. You've heard, but deliberately ignore them insofar as they do not align with the doctrinal views of those who sleep with and see in the elimination of a legitimate government in another Arab country. Still, what is not being looked into is the fact that a significant number of chemical weapons were discovered November-December 2017 in Syrian territory that had been liberated from fighters. Terrorists points to the wrongdoings and abuses by the irreconcilable opposition. However, the OPCW's experts being sent there to identify evidence is not something which we see people eager to do. We demand that OPCW verify all of those areas. Access can be provided. Also, information is surfacing that at Tanf, the camp, American instructors trained a number of groups of fighters to stage provocations with chemical weapons used to create a pretext for a strike. It was clear to us that the attempt to shelter terrorists and at the same time to punish the regime so hated by some Western capitals will sooner or later be undertaken. Speaking heads on television screens sought to repeat last year's attack against Syria. Last year's strike. This morning, there were strikes, missile strikes, against the Tifror airfield in Homs province. We are deeply troubled by such actions. Provocations in Dunguma echo last year's incident in Han Shihun. The unifying moment aspect is the fact that there's a planned nature of these attacks. Analysis of the U.S.'s operations prior to and after the incident in Han Shihun in April 2007 shows that Washington, ahead of time, prepared for its operation. The U.S. Porter and Ross naval destroyers from 4 to 7 April last year, that is when the toxic substance was used in Han Shihun before the strike against the Shayrat airbase, were already present in the Mediterranean waters where they were engaged in planned operations. They did not enter the ports where an exchange of munitions could have been taken place by increasing the number of cruise missiles. Inter alia, 4 to 5 April, the Porter destroyer was located southeast of Sicily, and the Ross naval destroyer was in passage from the Rota naval base in the area more south of Sardinia. Later, 6 April, an expedited movement of both naval destroyers was reported in the firing positions more southwest of Cyprus. From there, on 7 April, they conducted a mass strike against the Shayrat airfield. At the same time, the number of Tomahawk missiles that were launched, 59 units, surpassed the overall munitions for 2 naval destroyers if they had actually been engaged in the anti-missile defense operations that had been assigned to them. And for that purpose, only 48 units were necessary. Thereby, U.S. naval vessels, even prior to the chemical incident in Han Shihun, entered military service with fit-for-strike equipment that is with an increase of cruise missiles that were that were necessary for the anti-missile defense, and this could attest to prior planning by Washington of a strike against Damascus. The fake news on Saturday from Duma are geared inter alia towards drawing attention of society away from the Skripal case, which was muddled up by London, and polling and throwing on Russia completely unconfirmed accusations, and with the aim of pooling solidarity to build an anti-Russian alliance. Now, the English are stepping away from a transparent investigation and putting forward specific responses for the questions put, and at the same time, they are sweeping up their tracks. During the Security Council meeting, 5 April, on the Skripal case, we cautioned that an attempt to unjustifiably place blame on us of having had a hand in the Salisbury incident was linked to the Syrian chemical dossier. Yesterday, this issue saw new interesting developments. For the moment, the UK Foreign Minister Boris Johnson continues to disclose things against Russia and attempt to be witty. And here is the following pearl. Experts of British naval experts south of Cyprus intercepted on the day of Skripal's poisoning. Intercepted reports from Damascus suburbs to Moscow, and this is what Times is reporting. It contains the following sentence. The phrase, the message has been delivered. The parcel has been delivered, and 2 individuals successfully left. This turns out to be part of the intelligence information provided by London to allies prior to the expulsion of Russian diplomats. However, is it not clear that there's an irrefutable link here? Is that not clear to all? Syria, Russia, Salisbury. I would hint to the British intelligence services, and I will do so without charge. Another powerful course. A step. Why not propose that Novichok, which is so liked now, was reached Salisbury directly from Syria by parcel to cover up their tracks? This is complete mockery here. Ambassador Haley recently stated that Russia will never be a friend of the United States, and I wish to respond to that. Friendship is something which is both reciprocal and voluntary. One cannot force a friendship. And we are not particularly keen to be friends with you. We are not begging to be friends with you. Well, what we want from you is really nothing. It's something that is normal, civilized relations, which you arrogantly refuse, disregarding elementary courtesy and basic courtesies. And you're misguided if you think that you have friends. You have so-called friends of yours are only those who cannot say no to you. And this is the sole criterion for friendship in your understanding. Russia has friends. And unlike yourselves, we do not have adversaries. We do not view the world through that prism. And yes, international terrorism, that is our enemy. However, we continue to propose cooperation. This needs to be respectful and mutual cooperation. It needs to be geared towards resolving real, not imagined problems. And you should be equally interested as we are in such cooperation. Ultimately, as permanent members of the Security Council, we bear the main responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Based through the relevant channels, we already convey to to the U.S. that armed force under mendacious pretext against Syria, where at the request of the legitimate government of the country, Russian troops have been deployed, could lead to grave repercussions. We call upon Western politicians to scale down their hawkish rhetoric, to meaningfully consider possible repercussions, and to cease the reckless spillover of threats to global security. What military misadventures of the West bring about are well known to us if we consider the examples of Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Libya. And nobody has vested you with the power to act as gendarmes, as policemen of the world, and at the same time to act both as investigators, procurators, judges, and executioners. We call for you return to the legal fold, to comply with the UN Charter, and to jointly tackle problems that arise, rather than attempting at each step to advance your egotistical geopolitical games. All of the energy needs to be focused on support for the political process in Syria, to which end it is necessary to constructively pool the efforts of all influential players. Russia always stands ready to engage in such cooperation. To conclude, Mr. President, I wish to take this opportunity to request an open briefing of the Security Council on the outcomes of the UN assessment mission in Raqqa and the situation in the Raqban camp. As we see the way members of the Commission attempting to create a smokescreen around this issue, which is a result of their actions in Syria, including the operation to raise Raqqa to the ground through the bombings. No chemical provocations will detract attention from this, from what you have done. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me also thank Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura and Deputy High Representative for Disarmament Affairs Thomas MARKRAM for their briefings. Mr. President, only 5 days ago, here in this Council, we mourned when we commemorated the sarin attack in Khan Sheikhoun a year ago. And then this weekend, again, a devastating gas attack was carried out on the city of Douma, killing more than 45 civilians, with more than 500 people suffering the consequences of this attack. This is yet another in a series of chemical weapons attacks in Syria. This is unacceptable. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is one of 9 Security Council members requesting this emergency meeting because we all felt the urgent need to address this horrific attack. Mr. President, we need to reinstate the prohibition of the use of chemical weapons. We need to reconfirm the basic norms of the international legal order. We need to stop the tragedy of Eastern Ghouta and the city of Douma. Mr. President, we were almost meeting twice today because one permanent member of this Council seemed not to want to focus discussion on the issue at hand, the chemical weapons attack in Douma. This begs the question whether it prefers an international community that stands by and watches as a spectator, as this member state covers for the crimes of its ally, the Syrian regime. These include crimes that amount to serious war crimes. But this Council should not stand idly by. It is the highest time for this Council to act in 3 ways: to condemn, to protect, and to hold to account. My first point, Mr. President. This Council today should condemn in the strongest possible words any use of chemical weapons. International law has been trampled upon. Silence and impunity are not an option. But a condemnation alone, however, is not enough. Mr. President, this brings me to my second point. We must deliver on our responsibility to protect. Protection of civilians must remain an absolute priority. We call on the Astana guarantors to use their influence to prevent any further attack. They should ensure the cessation of hostilities and de-escalation of violence, as per Security Council Resolution 2401. An immediate ceasefire in Douma is needed so that humanitarian and medical aid can reach the victims of this attack. And humanitarian personnel should be enabled to continue their life-saving work. We owe this to the men, women and children of Douma, of Syria. We owe this to our own citizens. The Kingdom of the Netherlands furthermore recalls that the majority of UN member states count on the permanent members of this Council not to use their veto in case of mass atrocities. The international community should be able to count upon this Council to uphold international humanitarian law and to uphold the international prohibition of the use of chemical weapons, and to act when international law is trampled upon. And let me be clear, we support the humanitarian work of the White Helmets. They do extremely important humanitarian work for the civilians in Syria in dire circumstances. This, Mr. President, brings me to my third point, accountability. All members in this Council regularly stress the need for accountability for perpetrators who use chemical weapons. Yet, this Council has not been able to move forward on this issue for months due to the use of the veto by one permanent Council member. This Council has been unable to tackle this crisis because one permanent member is direct party to the conflict and has proven that it will defend the Syrian regime at all cost. We must intensify our efforts to achieve a mechanism that can continue the meticulous work of the JIM and investigate and identify perpetrators independently from the politics in this Council. The JIM has identified both the Syrian regime and the non-state actor as responsible for the use of chemical weapons. As I said last week, the discontinuation of the JIM mandate cannot be the end of the story. More so because since the JIM ceased to operate, we received reports that the regime has carried out at least 6 more chemical weapons attacks and maybe even more. For those that claim that the chemical weapon attacks did not take place or that they are a fabrication, I have a clear message. Don't veto the establishment of an effective, impartial and independent attribution and accountability mechanism. Let us not forget, the UN is bigger than this Council alone. We have strong leadership at the top of the United Nations organization, and we have a powerful General Assembly. Both have to consider all instruments to advance accountability for the use of chemical weapons. The work should build upon the important work of the OPCW fact-finding mission and the JIM. And we welcome the immediate investigation by the OPCW fact-finding mission of the terrible incident in Douma this weekend. The fact-finding mission should be given full access and cooperation by all parties. And we reiterate our strong support for, first, the international, impartial and independent mechanism. Secondly, the Commission of Inquiry. Thirdly, the International Partnership Against Impunity, initiated by France. And fourthly, a referral of the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court in The Hague as the most appropriate path to accountability and justice. In conclusion, Mr. President, this Council has to act. The investigation by the fact-finding mission of OPCW must be completed as soon as possible, and there can be no impunity for the use of chemical weapons. To do otherwise is to effectively condone these appalling attacks. To do otherwise is to fail on our responsibilities, and to do otherwise is to undermine the international architecture that we collectively designed to stop such attacks. It is time for this Council and the international community as a whole to act. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Netherlands for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. de Mistura, and thank you, Mr. MARKRAM, for your briefings. Almost exactly 1 year ago, I stood on the floor of the Security Council and held up pictures of dead Syrian children. After that day, I prayed that I would never have to do that again. I could. There are many truly gruesome pictures. Many of us have worked hard to ensure that one day we would not have to see images of babies gassed to death in Syria. But the day we prayed would never come has come again. Chemical weapons have once again been used on Syrian men, women, and children. And once again, the Security Council is meeting in response. This time, I'm not going to hold up pictures of victims. I could. There are many, and they are gruesome. Worse are the videos imprinted in our minds that no one should ever have to see. I could hold up pictures of babies lying dead next to their mothers, brothers and sisters, toddlers and infants still in diapers, all lying together, dead. Their skin is the ashen blue that is now tragically familiar from chemical weapons scenes. Their eyes are open and lifeless. White foam bubbles from their mouths and noses. Pictures of dead Syrians who are not soldiers, people who are not armed, people who are the very definition of innocent and non-threatening, women and children hiding in basements from a renewed assault by Bashar al-Assad, families that were hiding underground to escape Assad's conventional bombs and artillery. But the basements that Syrian families thought would shelter them from conventional bombs were the worst place to be when chemical weapons fell from the sky. And Saturday evening, the basements of Douma became their tombs. It's impossible to know for certain how many have died because of access to Douma is cut off by Assad's forces. But dozens are dead that we know of, and hundreds are wounded. I could hold up pictures of survivors, children with burning eyes, choking for breath. I could hold up pictures of first responders washing the chemicals off of the victims, putting respirators on the children. First responders walking through room after room of families lying motionless with babies still in the arms of their mothers and fathers. I could show pictures of a hospital attacked by the chemical weapons. I could show pictures of hospitals struck by barrel bombs following the chemical attack. Ambulances and rescue vehicles have been repeatedly attacked, maximizing the number of dead civilians. Civil defense centers have been attacked in order to paralyze the medical response, to increase the suffering of the survivors. Who does this? Only a monster does this. Only a monster targets civilians and then ensures that there are no ambulances to transfer the wounded, no hospitals to save their lives, no doctors or medicine to ease their pain. I could hold up pictures of all of this killing and suffering for the Council to see. But what would be the point? The monster who is responsible for these attacks has no conscience, not even to be shocked by pictures of dead children. The Russian regime, whose hands are all covered in the blood of Syrian children, cannot be ashamed by pictures of its victims. We've tried that before. We must not overlook Russia and Iran's roles in enabling the Assad regime's murderous destruction. Russia and Iran have military advisors at Assad's airfields and operation centers. Russian officials are on the ground helping direct the regime's Starve and Surrender campaign, and Iranian allied forces do much of the dirty work. When the Syrian military pummels civilians, they rely on the military hardware given by Russia. Russia could stop this senseless slaughter if it wanted, but it stands with the Assad regime and supports without any hesitation. What's the point of trying to shame such people? After all, no civilized government would have anything to do with Assad's murderous regime. Pictures of dead children mean little to governments like Russia, who expend their own resources to prop up Assad. And this Council, which saw these pictures last year, has failed to act because Russia has stood in its way every single time. For a year, we've allowed Russia to hold the lives of innocent Syrians hostage to its alliance with the Assad regime. This allowed Russia to also weaken the credibility of the United Nations. We are quick to condemn chemical weapons in the Security Council, but then Russia prevents any action, vetoing 5 resolutions on this issue alone, 11 vetoes altogether to save Assad. and our lives go on as usual. The Council created the Joint Investigative Mechanism. It found the Syrian regime responsible for the attack at Khan Sheikhoun a year ago. Because Russia supported Assad and his actions, Russia killed the mechanism. We condemned it, and our lives went on as usual. We pushed for a ceasefire. The Council unanimously agreed, but it was immediately ignored by Russia and Assad. We condemned it, and our lives went on as usual. And now, here we are, confronted with the consequences of giving Russia a pass in the name of unity. A unity that Russia has shown many times before they don't want. Here we are in a world where chemical weapons use is becoming normalized. From an Indonesian airport to an English village to the homes and hospitals of Syria. Since the Assad regime used chemical weapons at Khan Sheikhoun 1 year ago, chemical weapons have been reportedly used dozens of times. And this Council does nothing. What we are dealing with today is not about a spat between the United States and Russia. This is about the inhumane use of chemical agents on innocent civilians. Each and every one of the nations in this Council are on record opposing the use of chemical weapons. There can be no more rationalizations for our failure to act. We have already introduced and circulated to the Council a resolution demanding unrestricted humanitarian access to the people of Douma. Assad is doing all he can to assure maximum suffering in Douma. Our priority must be to help the starving, the sick, and the injured that have been left behind. We also call on this Council to immediately reestablish a truly professional and impartial mechanism for chemical weapons attacks in Syria, including the attack this weekend. We hope our colleagues on this Council will join us, as they have before. This is the very minimum we can do in response to the attack we just witnessed. Russia's obstructionism will not continue to hold us hostage when we are confronted with an attack like this one. The United States is determined to see the monster who dropped chemical weapons on the Syrian people held to account. You have heard what the President of the United States has said about this. Meetings are ongoing. Important decisions are being weighed even as we speak. We are on the edge of a dangerous precipice. The great evil of chemical weapons use that once unified the world in opposition is on the verge of becoming the new normal. The international community must not let this happen. We are beyond showing pictures of dead babies. We are beyond appeals to conscience. We have reached the moment when the world must see justice done. History will record this as the moment when the Security Council either discharged its duty or demonstrated its utter and complete failure to protect the people of Syria. Either way, the United States will respond. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I thank the Peruvian presidency for having convened this Emergency Security Council meeting, which France solicited with 8 other member states of this council. I also wish to thank the Special Envoy, Mr. Staffan de Mistura, and the Deputy to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Mr. Thomas MARKRAM, for their important and thorough briefings. Mr. President, there are times in the life of nations where what is essential is at stake: life or death, peace or war, civilization or barbarism, the international order or chaos. This is the case today after the horrific chemical carnage which once again pushed the limits of horror on Saturday in Douma. We are aware of the fact that 2 new chemical weapons attacks, particularly serious ones, took place in Douma on 7 April. The human toll, provisionally, but still horrendous, is nearly 50 dead, including a number of children, and 1,000 wounded. This toll is likely to be even higher. Some areas remain inaccessible for assistance. Once again, toxic substances have been dropped to asphyxiate, to kill, to terrorize civilians by reaching them in the basements where they sought refuge. Chlorine gas has the specific feature of being a heavy gas, capable of entering basements. For this reason, it is used. And, Mr. President, this is the level of the deadly cynicism that we have reached in Syria. There is no language to describe the horror of the images which surfaced on 7 April, nearly 1 year after the Han Sheikhoun attack, which killed nearly 80 people. What we see on the thousands of photos and videos which surfaced in the course of several hours since the attacks on 7 April, these serve as a reminder of the images we far too often saw, images of children, adults suffocating due to exposure to concentrated chlorine gas. But what we also see are people suffering significant convulsions, these phenomena of excessive saliva, of eyes being burned. These symptoms are symptomatic of exposure to a potent neurotoxin mixed with chlorine to heighten the lethal effect. Overall, as I mentioned, more than 1,000 people have been exposed to this deadly chemical compound. The experience and the successive reports of the Joint Investigative Mechanism reflect the fact that there is no doubt as to the perpetrators of this most recent attack. The Syrian army forces and their agencies alone have the requisite knowledge to develop such sophisticated toxic substances with such a high degree of deadliness, and only the Syrian armed forces and the departments have a military interest in this use. This attack took place in Duma, an area which has been subjected to relentless shelling by the Syrian army for a number of weeks. Use of such weapons, alas, enables far more rapid tactical progress than was seen with conventional weapons. We are all aware that the Syrian regime has already been identified as being responsible for the use of chlorine and sarin gas as a chemical weapon, and this by the joint UN-OPCW investigative mechanism 4 times at least. There are no illusions as to the sincerity of the declaration delivered by Syria as to the state of its chemical stockpiles in 2013. Unfortunately, once again, we have proof with evidence. This dovetails with the regime's strategy of terror that has been unleashed against civilians. We have already experienced this before the world. At the worst, this is bad faith, and at the worst, at the absolute worst, complicity. The Damascus regime clearly seeks, by stoking terror, to conquer other urban areas which it seeks to control. What is more effective to prompt those who resist to flee than those the Middle Ages style sieges with chemical threats being posed? Let us be clear-eyed. These children who are held hostage are not collateral victims, as is said. These are deliberate targets of these chemical attacks designed and planned for this purpose, to wage terror. And this is state terrorism, which the Damascus regime is engaged in with a litany of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Mr. President, the offensive and the shelling staged by the regime as well as by its Russian and Iranian allies over the past 48 hours reflects the degree to which they have engaged in a military in a military race without any consideration of the human cost. This latest escalation of violence, punctuated by new instances of chemical weapons being used, bring us face to face with the destructive madness of a Machiavellian regime which seeks to destroy its people completely. And its Russian and Iranian supporters are either unable or unwilling to stop it. We are aware of the fact, and the Russian authorities have confirmed this on a number of occasions, that Russian military forces have a presence in eastern Ghouta, on the ground and in the air. On 7 April, as the second chemical attack took place in Duma, Russian aircraft were also taking part in air operations in the Damascus region. Russian and Iranian military support is present on the ground and at all levels of the Syrian war machinery. No Syrian aircraft takes off without the Russian ally being informed. These attacks took place either with a tacit or explicit consent of Russia, or despite its reluctance and despite its military presence. I am unaware of which of these two abuses is more alarming when it comes to our collective security. Mr. President, the stakes revolving around this recent attack are extremely grave. This is the latest proof that normalization of chemical weapons use, which is to be attributable not only to a regime that has now become uncontrollable, a regime that continues to gas civilians with complete impunity, but also with respect to its supporters, including a permanent member of the Security Council. It failed in its commitment to implement Resolution 2118, which it itself co-sponsored. And its responsibility in the endless, unending tragedy in Syria, of the war in Syria, is overwhelming. So towards Syria, France naturally turns towards Russia to put forward two demands. The first demand is a cessation of hostilities and the establishment of an immediate ceasefire in Syria in line with Resolution 2401, adopted 25 February last. To date, this resolution has not been upheld by the Damascus regime. We deplore and lament the fact that it was not possible to implement this resolution, which was unanimously adopted, resolution stipulating both a truth and emergency humanitarian access. The second requirement is the establishment of a new international investigative mechanism, which will be able to document all of the factors of the attack in Duma and compel the perpetrators for them to be brought to justice. The disappearance of the joint investigative mechanism last November due to two successive Russian vetoes has stripped us of an essential tool of deterrence. For this reason, we support any initiative to bridge this gap. To this end, and in this spirit, France is committed to a partnership to combat chemical impunity. And in the same spirit, we endorse the draft resolution that has been proposed today by the United States. Mr. President, with this attack, the Assad regime yet again is testing the international community's determination to ensure respect for the prohibition of chemical weapons use. From our part, it needs to be met with a united, categorical, and robust response. There must be an understanding, and it must understand that chemical weapons use against civilians will no longer be tolerated. Those who flout this fundamental rule of our collective security will have to be held accountable and assume the consequences. The Assad regime needs to hear an international response. France stands ready to fully shoulder its role alongside our partners. Ultimately, we know that only an inclusive political solution will bring an end to 7 years of a conflict that has claimed the life of 500,000, a conflict that has pushed millions on the roads of exile. France will remain fully committed alongside the Special Envoy of the United States and in line with the Geneva process. However, in the light of this most recent carnage, we can no longer merely repeat words which, without being followed up by deed, are liable to be hollowed of all sense. And so I wish to reiterate here, as was stressed by President Macron on a number of occasions, that France will shoulder its full responsibility to combat a proliferation of chemical weapons. France will be clear. France will honor its commitments and honor our word. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.